You're listening to Convenience Matters, brought to you by NACS. We'll talk about what we see at stores and what the future may hold for our industry.
Sometimes with government relations issues, we talk about how we need your voice to address something that's in flux. Sometimes we talk about government relations, something has happened, and what you need to do to make sure you adhere to regulations that are underway. Today is a discussion about something that is underway, and that relates to SNAP, food stamps, and how they are transferring to a card. And it's going to be a chip, and in some cases, it's going to be tap. We're going to walk through all that. It is something that is coming in 2 states in early 2025, which means you need to prepare now if you're in those 2 states, and you also need to prepare now if you're not in those 2 states, because it's probably going to continue to a lot more states. So having our conversation today is Margaret Mannion. She is NACS Government Relations Manager, and she can dive through this issue. She also did a really nice job covering it in the September issue of NACS Magazine. So thanks for joining us today, Margaret.
Thank you. Is it too cheesy to say long-time listener, first-time caller, or what do you think about that?
You kind of took us back. So sounds great. Yes, we're on 50,000 watts. We're nationwide.
I love it.
We're hitting the top 40 right after this. So yes, thanks for joining us today.
Thank you. Yeah, no, I'm here to spread the word about this massive, massive change that's coming that no one really knows about yet.
So I started with, I think, a couple acronyms: CHIP, EBT, SNAP, all of this. But basically what we're talking about is electronic benefits transfer, and the move that states have done to try to address fraud in the current system. But it creates massive complications for retailers, and that includes convenience stores that make up about 40% of the stores that accept EBT, food stamps, and WIC. So that's my introduction. I pretend to know the issue. Why don't you take us back and walk us through how we got to where we're going with these new EBT cards?
Right. So basically, I do think it's important to take a look at how we got here and why we're seeing this shift. Skimming in general is not unique to EBT. We all have seen skimmers on POS terminals, fuel pumps, ATMs, what have you. But as we have kind of seen this shift to chip credit cards and chip debit cards and more added security features, criminals have now turned their attention to target individuals on SNAP who are already struggling financially. And it is a huge, huge problem. And just really a matter of minutes, a criminal can cash out someone's entire SNAP benefits right after their accounts receive their monthly funding from the state. And since EBT card holders don't have the same kinds of protections that credit card holders might, or debit cards with their banks, they might not be fully reimbursed or reimbursed at all for those stolen benefits. And this, obviously, on top of already struggling financially, it's a huge, huge burden on them. And over the past few years, I think we've seen an increase in news reports on this, especially since COVID. And it's really kind of garnered the attention of policymakers, both in Congress here in DC and in state and local legislatures. So I guess historically, and I can kind of go down the wonky rabbit hole here, so you can stop me if you have a question about any of this. But basically, Congress took action on this at the end of 2022 in an appropriations bill. They passed a law that would help SNAP participants who have been a victim of card skimming and getting some of those benefits reimbursed. And I do have a number here that USDA reports that over $94 million has been returned to SNAP beneficiaries to replace these stolen benefits. So it's a massive chunk of change as well, too. And so in response to all of this, USDA has been overseeing some efforts to modernize EBT cards to include chip technology, which is what I'm here to talk about today.
So I've been part of those news reports. Reporters will call us, whether on the government relations team or call me, and it's like, okay, we have this issue. Have you heard about this? And it's a perfect example of why your voice needs to be heard on issues, because emotional issues get traction. And not talking about policymaking with this, but it's a really perfect example of somebody saying, here is a problem. It's affecting people who can least afford to have this problem. Let's take action. So now we have action. And there are 2 states I mentioned, and I will mention them by name, California. And usually when something happens in California, it's 1/8 of the population. It is something that is likely to spread. So just like the weather, it will come west and it will go east. And that is the first state that is now looking at these new chip cards. And it is not as simple as taking, okay, well, we used to have these cards that didn't have a chip in it. Now we have a card that does have a chip in it. Now we have a card that also can tap. There are some complications in here that go well beyond, oh, look, there's new cards.
Yeah, exactly. And I think a lot of people, when this first was discussion started on this, they thought the same thing. Oh, we have POS terminals that take chip credit cards and chip debit cards. It's just adding a chip onto the EBT card, right? That's fine. Wrong. Nothing is ever that simple in this world that I have chosen to make a career out of. I think conversation started spring last year. This massive group of stakeholders has gotten together to work on developing new technical specifications for the chip that will go on the EBT chip card so that retailers can process these transactions. And after over a year, it was finally just published at the end of August. So this is fairly recent. So in California, let's say in a perfect world, this is how the process would work. You would be able to use your EBT card to insert it into the chip POS device, put your PIN number in, and be able to access your benefits and buy whatever groceries you have in your cart for the day. However, there is also this whole network of upstream payments processors and point of sale providers and merchant acquirers and all these different names. And they all need time to update their systems to allow retailers at the very end of this chain to be able to process these EBT chip transactions. And this is going to take time. And what we will see, and what I think California is banking on here, is that it's going to take a lot of time for chip to be accepted. And what we're seeing instead is this push for, okay, we're working on chip, but we're going to also do what's called an ECL fallback, or a magnetic stripe fallback. So essentially, when you're at the checkout counter and your credit card, you put the chip in and it's not reading correctly, and the system tells you to switch to the swipe. That's what we're going to see, I think, in the very beginning stages of this rollout.
And that's important because in some of these early tests, as many as 40% of the transactions failed. So when you have a failed transaction, I think I don't have to really explain to retailers, but what happens is you have a very, let's be polite, frustrated customer, because the customer came there to buy stuff. That stuff cannot be bought. And depending upon ability to go to another store or have time to go to another store, there's things you want to get that you can't get. So an awful lot of frustration expressed at the retailer, and the retailer loses the sale. And then, people being people, you get online, you complain about it. Don't go to this place. They don't have their act together. But it's, as you said, an endpoint of a very long chain. And it's good to hear that there is this fallback, but that should not make people feel any less that this is an urgent matter. If you're in California, and the other state is Oklahoma, but California is happening first. So you had a couple suggestions in your article. What do you need to do now? Who do you need to start contacting? How do you move this process along so when it happens, and regardless of if it's in California, pay attention because this will apply to you eventually. What are some things that retailers should be doing now and in what particular order?
That's exactly correct. If you're in California or in Oklahoma, for reference, California is looking at a mid-January 2025 rollout of all of these new cards. Oklahoma is looking at a summer 2025 rollout. If you operate in either of these states, reach out to your POS providers or third-party processors now, like today. Do it as soon as you can. You need to start testing your systems to understand how they'll be affected when they're presented with these EBT chip cards. And what you'll want to do is ask them to update your point of sale terminals to fully support EBT chip cards. So we've just published a retailer alert on convenience.org/advocacy. That kind of details all the technical specifications you'll need to ask your POS providers or third-party processors to update your systems. Some other resources that might be available, your processor, when you call them, they should be able to supply you with test cards so you can begin testing. If you're unable to get test cards from your processors, FIS, which is a financial services company in the SNAP world, they are able to provide them directly upon request, and you can do that by emailing emv.testcards@fisglobal.com. I know many retailers have already started to do that. Our partners at the National Grocers Association, they have a technical assistance center that's a cooperative grant project with USDA Food and Nutrition Service, which they oversee the SNAP program. It's nationalgrocers.org/SEMTAC, SEMTAC, and they should be able to help provide test cards if needed too. There's also these calls that happen every Tuesday with USDA and retailers and payment processors and anti-hunger advocates. There will be more information on our retailer alert on convenience.org about that. And finally, I know that this is coming out during the show. USDA is hosting a retailer roundtable on Thursday, October 10th, which is, I think, at the very end of the show, from 1 to 3 p.m. Eastern. And it's going to really allow SNAP retailers to talk directly with USDA officials about the experiences that they have been having, challenges, successes, and it's hopefully going to be part of a continued dialogue between retailers and the agency and getting these cards out to the people who need them.
And as I mentioned, 1/8 of the country is going to be affected. And also, if you do operations in multiple states, if you are Texas and Oklahoma, if you are California and fill in the blank state that borders. I do know what states border, but I don't want to waste time on that. But I do know it's not like Rhode Island. So there are bordering states, but if you have stores in California, you probably want to get all your stores ready while you're doing this process, because otherwise it's going to be piecemeal. We talked about these 2 states. There's 48 other states that we said it's likely to come. Is there any sense, I don't want to put you on the spot, I mean, predictions always can be wrong, but when this might roll out and what areas of the country might it happen next? And, well, I'll stop with that question first. I got more.
Yeah, no, that's a great question. And I think your question is the one that's on everyone's mind is, okay, we have California, we have Oklahoma. I think a lot of other states are waiting to see how the rollout goes in those 2 states. Ultimately, it hasn't been mandated by Congress that all EBT cards have to be chip cards. That hasn't happened yet. Who knows what the end of the year is going to bring in terms of legislation. It really is up to the states at this point if they want to make this transition. But I do think that next year we will see other states start moving in this direction. And also, too, even if you're in these like border states or if you have multiple stores in multiple states, people travel. People on EBT or people on SNAP, they travel, they bring their EBT cards with them. What do you do if you're presented with an EBT chip card in your store in Arizona? You don't want that person to, number one, the card to break the system and shut everything down in your store, that would be a disaster. Number two, this is a vulnerable population of people who are just trying to buy groceries. If they're unable to access their SNAP benefits, that's a huge problem. And that's kind of been our concern all along in this process. And our biggest fear is that, if the chip transition is rolled out too quickly and your POS systems, your retailers aren't ready to accept these cards, SNAP customers overall in California and Oklahoma, wherever, they're not going to be able to access their benefits at all. And that's our biggest fear and the biggest obstacle that we're trying to overcome here. And that's why NACS, we worked with our retailer partners as well, and the other associations in this space, to get California to delay their chip implementation date. Originally, they wanted to start this mass migration by the end of the summer, but as I just said, that new technical specification wasn't even published until the end of August. Mm-hmm. So we're really pleased to see that the state listened to our concerns, the current concerns of payment processors, of anti-hunger advocates, and they delayed their implementation until January.
This also presents a good opportunity for the industry to shine. I know it's a challenge, just like all new technologies, whether it's EMV or there are things like that. There's a lot of hurdles and there's some expenses. But on the positive, as we move more towards fresh food, a trend that we've seen over the last 10, 20 years, it gives us an opportunity to show where do we fit into this broader equation with EBT that, as I mentioned earlier, we're around 50%. We're just short of 50% of stores that are part of the program. And we're often, you talked about vulnerable people, we're often the place that they can somebody in the family can go to, even if it's not in a car. It's that gallon of milk. It's the dozen eggs or a loaf of bread or something until you can do a larger grocery shop. So we fit in a pretty important way for a lot of people who are looking for sustenance in these fill-in items until they can do that once every 2-week grocery shop. So it's a chance to shine. It's not the easiest thing to put a super positive spin on, but there is one there when we can do this right. But a lot of work to get there to do this right.
Exactly. And you said it correct, exactly how I would put it. We hear from convenience retailers all the time that they deeply value the role that they play in the SNAP program, because in rural America, as you said, it might be the only place in town where you can get groceries in between trips to the grocery store, or in urban America, it's the only place accessible by public transportation or walking, or it's open 24/7 so that mom or dad who's working the night shift can get that gallon of milk for their kids in the morning. We provide an impactful service to our communities, and we act as that access point for nutrition for SNAP families. And we want to be able to support them, support their families, and ultimately, we want them to just be able to buy groceries without worrying about their SNAP benefits being stolen.
So you gave a great rundown of what we can expect. You told us where we can find all this stuff. You told us about how people can get going. You've done a lot in communicating this. There's a webinar that you can find on convenience.org. The September issue of NACS Magazine, nacsmagazine.com, September issue. You can read it online, or if it's in your mailbox and waiting to be read for your next plane ride or something like that. A lot of opportunities. Margaret's going to be at the show. We're all going to be at the show. And then after that, there's always opportunities to reach out to Margaret or anybody else on the team and talk through what you need to do. She's the expert on this in our industry and can help you get to a good place on this. So thank you for joining us.
Thank you. And, I am always here. I'm open to any kind of questions. If I don't know the answer to the question, I can point you in the direction of somebody who does. This has kind of been my life for the past year or so, and it's finally kind of coming to fruition, and we're going to see it starting next year.
Well, we'll probably have another podcast for you to talk about this and see how we're going on this. So thanks again for joining us today.
Thank you.
And thank you all for listening to Convenience Matters.
Convenience Matters is brought to you by NACS and produced in partnership with Human Factor. For more information, visit convenience.org.